Chapter 19. The Thrill of Pursuit. The hum of the van pod resonated with the electric tension in the air as the night streets of Kingston blurred past, each alley twisting like a serpentine labyrinth. Lucas sat rigid, eyes half closed, focusing every ounce of concentration on the telepathic hold he had over their driver. The driver's thoughts swirled chaotically, a tumult of fear and confusion, but Lucas anchored him with a steady mental grip, guiding him through the maze-like city. Behind them, the twin security pods accelerated, their lights piercing through the shadows and growing closer with every turn. Inside each pod, the guardians of the law sat stone-faced, determined to close the distance. Their pods handled the sharp corners with ease, rubber-like tires gripping the ground as they pressed forward, relentless in their pursuit. Lucas could hear the distant growl of their engines, a stark reminder of the peril they faced. Mina glanced back, her eyes narrowed as the security pods closed in. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, her heartbeat synced with the van's wild lurches. She felt the familiar restraint on her powers, a control she had grown accustomed to, but this was different. She needed to do something. Now. "Lucas," she whispered urgently, "I'm going out there." Lucas barely nodded, the strain of his telepathic connection tightening his features. "Be careful," he managed, his voice taut. "I'll try to support you, if I can." With a deep breath, Mina slid open the side door of the van pod. The wind whipped against her face, carrying the city's sense of metal and damp stone. She tensed, focusing as the raw energy she usually kept buried swelled within her, filling her limbs with an almost overwhelming strength. It felt liberating, intoxicating, yet frightening. She leapt from the van pod and hit the ground running, her pace accelerating with every stride until she raced alongside the pursuing pods. The Guardian's eyes widened in shock as her form blurred past them. Mina could feel the power coursing through her, each stride fueled by an exhilarating rush. She pushed herself harder, her mind zeroing in on the closest security pod. A fleeting plan formed. She would distract them, buy her friends time to escape. But in her eagerness, she felt her control slip. With each pulse of energy, her movements became erratic, the world around her spinning as she surged forward, her speed skyrocketing beyond her usual limits. She darted in and out of view, a flicker in the night, but it left her feeling dizzy and disoriented, her powers spiraling beyond what she could manage. From the security pod's window, one of the Guardians raised his arm, a glint of metal revealing a stun gun aimed squarely at her. Mina's heart raced as she saw the barrel line up with her. In a burst of instinct, she dodged just as the stun blast erupted, its electric charge lighting up the night. The bolt seared past her shoulder, narrowly missing, as she ducked into a quick roll. Lucas's breath caught in his throat as he witnessed the near miss. His grip on the driver faltered for a split second, a surge of panic threatening to break his concentration. He could feel the driver's rising fear as well, and Lucas struggled to maintain control, forcing his focus back. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, pushing down the instinctive urge to leap out after Mina. She had to handle this. She needed to handle this. Fueled by adrenaline, she zigzagged to avoid the following stun shots. Her reflexes sharpened with every burst of speed, each shot missing by mere inches. She was so close to the pod now that the Guardian had to lean back, struggling to keep pace with her rapid movements. Mina seized the moment. In one fluid motion, she darted toward the pod's side, her hand snapping up to grab the stun gun's barrel, just as he attempted to fire again. She wrenched it from his grasp, tossing it aside before he could react. The Guardian's look of shock was brief. Mina had already surged ahead, forcing the pod to slow down to avoid hitting her. She lunged to the left, grabbing a loose metal crate near the edge of the street. In one swift motion, she heaved it into the pod's path, forcing the driver to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. The sudden jolt slowed the security pod, giving her team precious seconds. Mina pushed harder, the edges of her vision tinged with fatigue, as she sprinted back toward the van pod, matching its speed in a desperate burst. Lucas, sensing her flagging energy, reached out telepathically. She felt his presence like a steadying hand, the link giving her the focus she needed to maintain the impossible pace. But the reprieve was brief. The second security pod adjusted course, closing in on her. She couldn't keep this up. Her power was fading, muscles burning. Reaching for her last bit of strength, she made a sharp right, diving down an even narrower alley, hoping to confuse her pursuers. Lucas, sensing her direction, guided the van pod in tandem, keeping it just out of the Guardian's line of sight. But the first pod's driver was relentless, steering into the alley after her. Desperate, Mina reached out with her mind, willing a flash of energy, a burst of light. Just as the pod came within reach, her skin glowed, casting a blinding flash that momentarily dazed the driver. The security pod wobbled, narrowly avoiding a row of barrels as its driver shielded his eyes. Mina seized the opportunity to slip past, her body feeling heavy, breaths labored. She stumbled back toward the van pod, fingers barely brushing the edge as Thomas leaned out, gripping her arm and pulling her back inside. "Not bad, Speedster," he said, his expression a mix of admiration and relief. But there was no time to celebrate. The second pod was catching up, its engine roaring with determination. Lucas released a long, shaky breath as Mina collapsed onto the seat, exhausted. He didn't have time to ask if she was all right. The second pod was closing in. Thomas readied himself, muscles tense, prepared for the moment Lucas's telepathic hold might slip. Mina, between breaths, managed a shaky grin. "I think they're getting tired of me." Her voice was tinged with exhilaration, a mix of adrenaline and fatigue. Lucas focused his energy on a mental surge, nudging the van pod to take a sharp turn just as the second pod advanced. His hold on the driver wavered, and he clenched his jaw, fighting to maintain control. The driver's resistance flared, but Thomas placed a firm hand on the man's shoulder, grounding him, keeping him compliant. As the van veered down a dim alley, Lucas glimpsed an opportunity. There was an open passageway just ahead, a hidden escape route that only someone with a local's knowledge would know. He directed the van toward it, urging the driver forward, willing him to press through the narrow space. The van pod skidded, scraping along the alley's tight walls, barely managing to squeeze through. The security pods were moments behind, but the narrowness of the path slowed them down. Mina watched, breath bated, as the Guardians struggled, their pods barely fitting. They were forced to maneuver carefully, buying her team a crucial lead. Suddenly, a shout broke through the tension. A pedestrian, caught unaware in the chaos, stumbled onto the street just as the lead security pod barreled forward. With instinctive reflexes, Mina surged back into action. She shoved the unsuspecting civilian out of harm's way just in time, narrowly avoiding a collision that could have been disastrous. The Guardian in the pod swerved, barely missing them both, and the sound of metal scraping against metal echoed in the night. As the adrenaline coursed through her veins, Mina's thoughts raced. She was alive, but for how long? The thrill of danger surged within her, fueling her determination to protect those she cared about. They emerged onto a quiet, abandoned street on the other side, the security pods blocked temporarily by the tight exit. Lucas's telepathic grip slackened, and he let out a heavy sigh, his mind pulsing with exertion. For now, they were safe. Mina leaned back, closing her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion, but also a hint of exhilaration. She'd pushed herself further than ever before. Thomas patted her shoulder, a look of admiration mixed with relief. You were incredible out there, Mina. You really gave them a run for their money." Lucas turned to the driver, still under his control, and released his grip, taking a pause to make sure Mina was okay. "That was crazy and dangerous," he said, shaking his head with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "But damn, that was badass!" As the driver came back to himself, confusion washed over his features. "What just happened? You can't control me like that," he argued, his voice edged with panic. Lucas kept his gaze steady, not backing down. "For your sake, I hope you understand what's at stake here." As they drove off into the night, the security pods left behind in the distance, Kingston's lights flickered like stars, their glow dimming as the van pod vanished into the city's darkened streets. Yet, even in the shadows, the tension lingered like an unresolved chord, a sense of impending danger that haunted them. But as they continued, a new sight loomed ahead. The western horizon glowed ominously, a storm brewing just beyond the city limits. Dark clouds swirled with fury, streaks of lightning illuminating the sky as they rolled towards them. The van pod slowed, the weight of the approaching storm pressing down on them, a reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. Mina's heart raced, not from the thrill of their escape, but from the anticipation of what was to come. She exchanged a glance with Lucas and Thomas, a shared understanding passing between them. The city might have been left behind for now, but the storm promised more than just rain. It heralded the unknown, and they would need every ounce of strength to face it. The van pod rolled to a stop as the first raindrops began to patter against the metal roof. Each drop echoed like a countdown, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their journey, a journey that had only just begun.